In this week's parsha, we have the great war that Avraham Avinu fought against four mighty kings. And in the aftermath of his victory, we have a very short episode which is recorded. It says, Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem, Malki Tzedek, who is the king of Shalem. This is really Yerushalayim. Chotzi lechem v'yoyim. He brought forth bread and wine. This was the traditional greeting for people who had returned from battle. Bread and wine. V'hu kohen le'eloyom. And he was a priest to the supreme God. Vayivarcheyu. And he blessed Avram. Vayomar, and he said, Baruch Avram le'eloyom, blessed is Avram to the supreme God, Konei Shemayim v'aretz, owner of heaven and earth. Uvarach eloyom, and blessed is the supreme God, Asher migein tzarecha b'yadecha, who delivered your enemies into your hands. So he gave a blessing first to Avram, and then a blessing to God. And Avram, in return, gave him a tithe of all the spoils of war. That's the story we're going to focus on. This Malki Tzedek, we don't know who he is. According to Chazal, he is Shem, the son of Noach. Comes, greets Avram, the victor in the battle. He gives him a blessing, gives God a blessing, and Avram gives him Meiser. So what is the significance of this encounter between Avram and Malki Tzedek? So to fully appreciate this, I'd like to share with you a Rambam. The Rambam, in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, discusses at great length how Avodah Zarah, how idolatry developed. And this is a very interesting thing. If you look at any textbook of history of religion, you'll discover that the general conventional wisdom is that polytheism, paganism, came first and ultimately developed into monotheism. Monotheism is a refinement of the earlier primordial religions, which were pagan and polytheistic. And of course, this is the general paradigm. We always assume things are progressing and getting better. So if we find today that most people practice monotheistic religions, and if you go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, you find people practice polytheistic religions, we assume that this is a form of positive development, the progress. Now, the earlier religions we call primitive, and our modern religions, which are polytheistic, are more advanced. The problem is that the Torah has the exact opposite view. Adam Harishon certainly was a monotheist. He spoke to God. According to Chazal, Adam Harishon brought korbanos to Hashem. His children, Cain and Hevel, certainly did. So the first human beings were monotheists. So, in fact, according to the Torah, the exact opposite was the process. That man began as monotheist, and there was a reverse evolution into paganism and polytheism. So how did it happen? So the Rambam writes that it was really a process which involved many steps. First, in the time of Enosh, who was the grandson of Adam Harishon, a great error was made. And the error was like this. We know God made great things, the stars, the constellations, and the ancients believed that God runs the world through the constellations, through the configurations and rearrangements of the stars. This is how change is affected in the lower world. So therefore, in a sense, the stars and the constellations are God's servants, if you will. So we know that it's a great honor to the king when you show honor to his servants. So they held that it was appropriate to worship and show reverence to the stars and constellations, because this would be a form of honoring God. Not that really we're worshiping the stars and constellations, but by giving them honor, this is a way of showing devotion to God. This was the beginning of the slippery slope. And what came next? The next step was that there were priests of this cult of the stars who said that it's not our own idea, but God himself commanded this. That God wants us to serve his servants and wants us to serve the stars. And see, there's a decline here. It was initially, they said, it's not God telling us to do this. We, on our own, figured out this is a good idea. So the next step is that the false prophet said that God himself commanded us that we should worship the stars and constellations. Then they went a step further, and they said that instead of worshiping the stars and constellations directly, we can worship representations of the stars and constellations. Now, what does a star look like? What does a constellation look like? It's so far away. So the prophets again said that this star has the following shape, and they would make statues and representations that would correspond to what they thought the tsura, the form of the constellation or star was. So they began to worship not only the stars, but they began to worship statues as representations of the stars. And then there was another step further where the priest said that the worship of the stars and of these statues can have positive or negative consequences. The tsura, the statue, is meitiva u'meria. It can bestow good and it can bestow evil. Almost as if to say that there's some delegation of authority, that God has handed over independent power to these images, and they can help you or hurt you. And therefore there's more of an incentive to begin to worship them. And then there's a further decline, and people began to forget that in fact there was a supreme overall God. And they believed that the statues and the stars were the only deities. So now we have a full polytheistic system without a supreme God. So this is the process of devolution, if you will, where monotheism declined into polytheism. And so it continued.
How long did this take?
It took hundreds of years. And the Rambam writes that ultimately reached the point that people were worshipping these statues and the stars, but the Rak of the universe, meaning God himself, no one acknowledged him, no one knew him, there were only individuals. Chanayich, Mesushelach, Noach, Shem, Va'ever. But the vast, vast, vast majority of people, they were pagans and polytheists. There was a small, small group of individuals who maintained the real faith. But for the most part, it was lost. And it says, and so the world continued until the pillar of the world was born. Who is the pillar of the world? Avraham Avinu. This is Avraham Avinu. And the Rambam describes beautifully Avraham Avinu. When this mighty individual, once he was weaned, meaning at a very young age, he began to explore with his mind. He was a child. He was not a mature adult. He was still a child. He began to think day and night. And he was wondering, How is it possible that the planets can stay in their orbits without anyone to conduct it? No one who causes it to revolve. It can't cause itself to revolve. So why do the orbits and the cycles of the celestial bodies continue? He had no teacher. There was no one to instruct him. Meaning Avraham had no access to that tradition that was maintained by Mr. Shelach and Noach and Shem and Aver. Avraham was totally cut off from.
Was there one in each generation?
There was a Shem. Aver was the grandson of Shem. Shem was the son of Noach, etc.
So there was a continuous.
There was a continuity. But Avraham had no access to this. He had no teacher, and he had no Media Dover. Elamushkab Urkasdim, he was sunk in Urkasdim, among the idolaters, Hatipshim, the foolish. V'aviv v'imo v'chol ha'am, his father, his mother, all the people, they were idolaters, who Ividimahim, and he joined them, he was with them. V'libo mishaltet, but his heart was roaming, umaven, and understanding, asher hisig derech ha'emes, until he grasped the truth. V'yada, and he came to know, she'eshim elokai echad, there's only one God. And so on and so forth. V'yada shekol ha'olam tayim, and he came to understand that the whole world was making a big mistake. And he came to understand why they were making the mistake. And at 40 years old, he fully recognized HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then he began to contend with the idolaters. He argued with them, he debated them, and so on and so forth. And he began his ministry, and he called to all mankind to serve the true God. Very, very beautiful, really worth reading description of the activities of Avraham Avinu. But this much, the Rambam tells us, that there was a tradition, a very small group of people who maintained the true faith as a Masorah, if you will, as a chain of tradition going back to Adam Harishon. But Avraham had no access to this chain of Masorah, and Avraham, on his own, philosophically, came to faith. So now we have an inkling of the significance of this encounter with Malki Tzedek. Malki Tzedek, according to Chazal, is Shem, the son of Noach. As the Rambam says, he is one of those people who is part of that chain of tradition. So Avraham Avinu, who independently came to faith, now for the first time in his life encounters one of these individuals who has a chain of tradition of Masorah going all the way back of the monotheistic tradition. So this encounter is not merely a matter of trivial import. This is a very serious thing. This is Avraham Avinu, who is on a path of discovery, who finally, for the first time in his life, encounters people who have access to a tradition of MS that reaches back to the very beginning of time.
How did it happen that he got cut off from it in the first place?
Geographically. Whereas he was in Urkasdim in the Far East with his parents and his family. And he had no access to these individuals who were living in the vicinity of Eretz Yisrael. So he was alone. That's what the Rambam says. He was alone. He had no Malamed, he had no teacher, he had no Media Dover, no one to teach him. He came to it on his own, but now for the first time, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought him to Eretz Yisrael, he encountered the great Malki Tzedek, who was the bearer of this tradition. So this is a very, very significant thing.
So Malki Tzedek was able to confirm his...
Well, that's what we're going to see tonight. We're going to see several interesting things about this encounter. Chazal don't elaborate on this encounter in great detail, but there are hints in various places as to what the significance of this meeting was. So let's begin with several psukim in the Haftarah. of this week's parsha. Now, the Haftarah of Parshas Lech Lecha is about Avraham Avinu, although his name isn't mentioned. And the verse says as follows. This is chapter Mem Aleph, verse Hey. It says, Ra'u iyim v'yira'u. The island saw, and they feared. Kitzais ha'aretz yecheradu. The ends of the earth trembled. Karvu v'ye'esayu. Yet they approached and they came. Okay, not clear what it's referring to. Ish isre'eu yahazayu. Each man would assist his friend. Ula achiv yomar chazak. And to his brother he would say, be strong. V'yachazek charash es-saref. The carpenter would encourage the metal worker. Machlik patish. The person who would be the finishing hammerer would encourage es-haylein po'am. The person who would pound from the start. Oimer ladevek toiv. I'm reading from the English translation. He would say that the glue is good. Vayechazkeiv masmerin, and he would strengthen his work with nails, lo yimait, that did not falter. And what are these people talking about? So, in the context, it's talking about people that built idols. And the idol manufacturers would encourage each other. Ish Yisrael Yahazaru. They would encourage each other. They would say, be strong. Let's do a good job making this idol. So, making an idol involved many things. These idols were made of wood, covered with metal. So you had the choresh, who's the carpenter, and you had the tzaref, the metal worker. So the carpenter would encourage the metal worker. He would say, get ready. I'm soon going to be finished with my woodwork, and it's going to be your turn to apply the metal. Now, among the metal workers, there were also two types of metal workers. There were those who were the machlik patish. They would smooth the metal covering with a very small hammer. As you apply the metal, but you have to beat the metal at every point to press it upon to the wooden form. So the person with that finishing work, he's the machlik patish. The hoylein poam is the person who applies the metal at the very beginning. There's one big bang to initially fasten it. So again, here the machlik patish, the person who does the finishing work, would encourage the starter. Get started already, because I'm ready to complete your work. And they would speak of the glue, meaning the bond between the metal and the wood, as being good, but they would strengthen it with nails that the metal shouldn't come off. So literally it's referring to people that are working to manufacture idols. That's what most of them first learn in context, and what it has to do with the rest of the chapter is not relevant to us. But the Medrash...
Is it the Navi?
Navi Yeshaya. But the Medrash says that this whole parsha we understood differently. This is what the Medrash says. The Medrash brings this pasuk. It says that the islands were scared, the ends of the earth trembled. So who are these islands? Who are these islands? Says the Medrash, these islands are Avram and Shem. They're islands. What does it mean they're islands? What sense are they islands? They're islands just like an island is distinct. An island is separate. Misuyamim ba'olam, it's distinct. It isn't connected to the mainland. So, until this point, Avram and Shem had no connection with each other. They had no contact, no communication. So, vis-a-vis one another, they're like islands. Two separate islands, no contact. So it says that Avram and Shem were very fearful of this encounter. They were both fearful of meeting each other. That's the meaning of the pasuk. That Ro'u iyim, The islands saw and they trembled, meaning they saw that there was an inevitability to their meeting each other, that events, historical events, the war, was bringing about that they should encounter each other. It was inescapable, unavoidable, but they both trembled. The islands trembled. And the place of earth, the ends of the earth, trembled. And this also refers to Avram and Shem. Because this one was at one end of the earth, and the other one was at the other end of the earth. Now they see that they're being brought together. Events are bringing them together. They trembled. They were fearful and they trembled. But ultimately they came together. They came close and they encountered each other. What happened? We'll see in a moment. What were they scared? What were they scared? So the Medrash says like this, that each one thought that the other would have a grievance. Shem thought that Avram would have a grievance because he was Maimed Rishoyim. Because Shem ben Noach was a big tzaddik. But many of his descendants were Rishoyim. So that's what Shem was scared of. Shem thought that Avram would have a grievance. You were Maimed Rishoyim. As righteous as you are, but look at your children. Your children are all Rishoyim. Avram was scared that Shem would have a grievance. Because in this battle, Avram killed many of Shem's descendants. So Avram was scared that Shem would have a taina. Shem would have a grievance. So they were scared to encounter each other. Right? That's what it says. Each was scared. Zen nisyori mizeh, loymar, shema toymar Shem. Maybe Shem will say, sheyesh belibo alai, he has a grievance, shirakti is bonov. And the other one was scared, shema toymar Avram. Maybe Avram will say, sheyesh belibo alai, shemarati rishoyim. I raised children who are wicked. Okay, so it's hard to understand exactly. Now, Shem's potential grievance, I understand a little better. That, Shem's upset Avram killed his children. Like, Avram should be upset that Shem had children who were Rishoyim. I mean, what's the issue here? Okay, we have to explore this. But finally they met each other. So you think, what would happen? If each one has a grievance on the other, you'd think it should be a shouting match, right? They get together, and one says, you're good for nothing, your children are Rishoyim. You're good for nothing, you killed my children, right? What happened? The exact opposite. They approached each other. Each one helped the other. And to his brother he said, be strong. Each one helped each other. We find in this encounter that Shem gave blessings to Avram. Avram gave gifts to Shem. He gave him Meiser. So we would have expected there should be this shouting match. You see the exact opposite. They encouraged each other. That Shem gave blessings to Avram, and Avram gave gifts to Shem. And it says like this, the carpenter encouraged the metal worker. So who does this refer to? The carpenter is Shem. So why is Shem called the carpenter? Guess yourself. Why would he be called the carpenter? Because he helped his father build the table. He helped his father build the table, so he's the carpenter, right? Why is Avram called the metal worker, the tzoreif? You see, because the tzoreif, the most important part of the metal worker's task, is to refine the metal. You start with the ore, and you refine the metal. To be tzoreif means to work with metal, but it really refers to the initial stage where you refine the ore. Where do you refine the ore? How do you refine metal?
Fire.
In fire, in a furnace. So we know that Avraham Avinu was thrown into the furnace. Right? He was nitzraf b'kivsha. He himself was refined in the furnace in Ur Kasdim. So Avram is called the tzoreif. So Shem is called the choresh. He's called the carpenter. Avram is called the tzoreif. He's called the metal refiner. And it says, v'yachazek charash es tzoreif. that the carpenter encouraged Tzareh, that means that Shem encouraged Avram. Now, the Medrash doesn't explain the machlik b'patish is hoylein poam. It seems again that Shem, for some reason, is called the machlik patish. He's the person who does the finishing work, the tapping with the little hammer. And Avram is called the holein poam. He's the person who gives one big blow with the hammer. Why that is, we'll explain later on. But the Medrash continues and says that Yoimar l'devek toiv, they say the bond is good. So this, the Medrash says, is not something that was said by Shem or Avram. This was said by the bystanders. The bystanders said that the bond is good, meaning Eilu umas ha'olam she'noim mutav lihidovek be'elo kashel Avram. Better we should be bonded to the God of Avram, lo nidovek ba'avodas kechavim shel Nimrod, and not cleave to the avodah zarah of Nimrod. And finally it says ve'yachaskev masmerim, they were strengthened with nails. So what does this mean? So here we have a machlokes, two versions of the Medrash. The version that's printed in our Medrash says that Avram strengthened Shem with Torah mitzvahs. Because Avram was a Navi, and Avram knew mitzvahs, he knew Torah, therefore he taught that to Shem. But Rashi in Yeshaya brings another version of the Medrash, the opposite, that Shem strengthened Avram with emunah, with faith. So it's a very, very beautiful Medrash. Let's try to understand it deeply. There's a Gemara in Maseches Nedarim that says like this. It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu originally wanted to bikesh lahotzi kuhuna mishem. He wanted to bring forth the priestly line from Shem. Ultimately it was Aaron. Aaron was the Kohen Gadol, his descendants were the Kahana. But God's original plan was to bring forth the priestly line from Shem. But why did Shem lose it? Because Shem put the blessing to Avram before the blessing to Hashem. In this parasha, when it says that Shem gave blessings to Avram, first he said, Baruch Avram l'kel olyon, blessed is Avram to the Supreme God. And then he said, Ubaruch kel olyon, and blessed is the Supreme God, asher migein tzarach b'yadecha, who handed your enemies over into your hand. So first he gave the blessing to Avram, and then the blessing to God. That's the reverse order. So Shem forfeited his kuhuna. And therefore the pasuk says, V'hu kohen, that he was a kohen, ve'ein zaro kohen, but his descendants weren't kohanim. That's the emphasis of the pasuk. That Shem, when Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem brought forth bread and wine, V'hu kohen le'el elyon, he was a priest of the Supreme God. Who kohen ve'ein zaro kohen? He's a priest, but his descendants aren't priests. So the question is, what did he do wrong? Where did he do wrong? So the Maharal says like this. Certainly, he didn't mean to say that Avram is more important than God. Right? Avram is greater than God. That's not likely. That makes no sense. Right? No one in his right mind would think that Avram, whose flesh and blood, is greater than God. But it means like this. It means, I don't want to accuse anybody of this, but let's say you wake up in the morning, and what's the first thing you think about? Yourself or God?
Think of yourself.
You think about yourself or something. Do I want to go back to sleep? I'm still tired. What do I have to do today?
In other words, assuming you think at that moment.
It's not because we really believe in any way that we are more important than God or we are greater than God. But to ourselves, we are more important in a sense. We have priority over God. Whereas my own concerns are more important to me than God. It's not that I am greater than God, but in terms of my interests and concerns, I am more important to myself than God is. So therefore, that was the same thing. Shem disqualified himself from being a Kayin because to a Kayin, God has to be the most important thing. God has to be the first thing in his mind, first and foremost. Because if a Kayin shows that there's something which is more primary to him, not that he's saying that this is greater than God, but it is more on his radar, that itself is a disqualification of being a Kayin. So when Shem gave the bracha to Avram over Hashem, he showed that he was more concerned for Avram than Hashem. Now, the truth is like this. This is something which we understand. You have a rabbi, Rabbi Vishal. There are some rabbis who, first and foremost, are men of God. And they serve the people, that's secondary. And there are others who are pastoral rabbis. They serve the people. And they are men of God, secondly. Okay? And that's a reality. Right? And there are some people that what excites them, what motivates them, what interests them is they're working with people. The divine aspect of it, the spiritual aspect of it, that's not what they're into. Other people are the opposite. So when it comes to a rabbi, okay, you can have rabbis of all sorts. When it comes to be a Kohen, right, a Kohen is not first and foremost a man of the people. A Kohen is first and foremost a man of God. His primary concern, his primary interest is dealing with God. Secondarily, he deals with people. So Shem, by putting Avram before God, showed that he was disqualified. And that's why the chain of Kahuna did not emerge from Shem. That's the first shot the Maharal says. Then the Maharal says the second shot. Very, very fascinating shot. He says like this. He says that there's a big difference between the faith of Avram and the faith of Shem. There's a person who comes to faith in two ways. One way of coming to faith is through historical experience. Another way is through philosophical investigation. Let's say the Jews in Mitzrayim. Right? They came to faith. How did they come to faith? Were they philosophers? Did they speculate? Did they discuss the possibility? How could the world have come into existence without a God? The cosmological proof, the teleological proof, the ontological proof of God's existence. They weren't philosophers. They experienced God. They witnessed God's actions. They saw the plagues. They saw the Makas Bechoros. They saw the Kriyas Yamsuf. They saw the Ma'amad Har Sinai. They heard God speaking. In other words, there were experiences from which they came to see the existence of God and God's omnipotence as a reality. That's one approach. As you come to understand God through historical experience. Another way to see God, or come to God, is through philosophical inquiry, speculation. That was the approach of Avraham Avinu. Shem lived through cataclysmic events. He was a witness to the Mabul. He saw the divine power, the divine salvation in the flood. Shem was not a philosopher like Avraham Avinu. Shem came to faith through his life experiences. What he witnessed, what he saw. Avram, who was totally cut off from that, came to faith through philosophical inquiry. The question is, which is more easily transmitted to the next generation? So the argument goes like this, that something which is logical, something which is a rigorous logical proof, can be conveyed to someone else in its full strength, full impact. Because I can take you through the logical steps, I can take you through the arguments, and then it'll be as clear to you as it is to me. Correct? In other words, if I want to prove the Pythagorean theorem, and I really understand it deeply, and I take you through the logical steps, step 1, step 2, step 3, and I show you the proof of it, I show you the applications of it, your understanding will be just as sharp as my understanding. Because we're doing something which is logical. But if we're dealing with something which is experiential, something which comes from our experience, there's no way I can transmit it to someone else with the same clarity, the same vividness as my own. I was there, I experienced it. For you, it's only secondhand, it's only being retold. And that, Maharal says, is the difference between Shem and Avram. In other words, Shem could not be the progenitor of a line of priests. Because it's true that he was a man of great faith, but his faith was rooted in historical experience. That cannot be transmitted to the next generation, and to the next generation, and to the next generation. So therefore, the kahuna of Shem lasts. Ata kayin, ve'ezarach kayin. You're the kayin, but your seed aren't kahanim. The chain of kahuna can come from Avram, because Avram's faith, which is rooted in his understanding, in his logical investigation, that can be transmitted to the next generation with the same rigor, with the same clarity that Avram himself had, and therefore his children would have equal emunah, equal faith, and therefore can be transmitted. That's why the line of kahuna doesn't come from Shem, but rather it comes from Avram. This is the Maral says in the second Shem. He says, now we can understand what's going on back in the Medrash. When we say that Shem and Avram were two islands, there was no contact, no communication. It isn't just that they were isolated from each other. These are two philosophical systems, two religious systems. We have the system of Shem, which is a system rooted in historical experience, a faith which is rooted in experience, and we have Avram, who is a faith which is rooted in logical proof. So now, each one believes that the other is dismissive of his position. In other words, Shem thinks that Avram will have a taina on me. What's the taina? That my children are Rishoyim. Now we understand exactly what the taina is. As Avram is saying, if your whole faith is based on historical experience, of course, it's inevitable that you'll have children who are Rishoyim. Because the children don't share the same experience, right? Obviously are not going to have the religious attitudes that you have. So that's what the Medrash says, that Shem will think Avram has a taina on me, right? Avram will say that your historical experience is irrelevant. The proof being that your own children are Rishoyim. That's the taina that Avram would have in Shem. And Shem would have a taina on Avram. That Avram killed Shem's children. What does that mean? He killed Shem's children. Because you don't value the historical experience, because you're killing the people who would carry forward the memory of that experience. Whereas you're just a man of logic, you believe that's all that counts. You believe that history has no value, and therefore what's the point? That these people are the only people that are maintaining that chain of historical tradition. Kill them out, we don't need them. They're good for nothing. You see what's going on over here? Whereas each one thinks that the other is dissing him, if you will. Because again, in other words, Shem thinks that Avram's objection is that history has no value because, you see, it produced Rishoyim. Right? So that's the taina that Avram will have on Shem. And the taina that Shem will have on Avram is that you're dismissing me because you're killing my children. You know, the issue over here is the value of history. But when they meet, it isn't that way. When they meet, they encourage and they bless each other. What does that mean? It means like this. It means because historical experience has value. But it has value when the starting point is a correct set of philosophical axioms. In other words, if you believe in God, so then all the historical events enhance your faith. They reinforce your faith. If you start with a wrong set of philosophical axioms, then the same experiences can shatter your faith. Let me tell you a story, a beautiful story that illustrates this idea. I heard there's an amazing story. I might have told it in the class. I ever told a class about the fire in the Chavetz Chaim's town in Ratten? Tell the story? No?
I heard on a tape.
It's like this. Pardon?
I heard on a tape, but not a tape of you, so not
Oh yeah?
class.
The story is like this, that the Chavetz Chaim lived in a town, Ratten. Ratten had a Jewish community, and the houses were all made of wood. So, if a fire would start, it could easily burn down the whole neighborhood. There were 2 fires in Ratten on 2 successive years. One year, the fire started at one end of the neighborhood. It burnt all the houses down, and it stopped just before the Chavetz Chaim's house. 26 houses were spared, the Chavetz Chaim's house, and 25 houses beyond it. Okay, so over that year, the people rebuilt. The next year, there was a fire that started from the other side of the neighborhood and burned down those 26 houses, including the Chavetz Chaim's house. So you think that, wow, the Bereshis really has it out for the people of Rabbi. So the Chavetz Chaim was overheard as his house was burning down. His Oy Ribono Shel Olam, Zisa Tata, sweet father. This is how kind you are. Says obviously there was a gzeir, there was a decree that all of Ratten had to burn down. And really, rightfully, the whole city could have burned down in 1 year. But in your great kindness, what did you do? You allowed that only 1/2 the town should burn down the first year, so that those whose houses remained could help the people who lost their houses. And then over the year they would rebuild, and then the other half of the town will burn down, and they could help us. It means like this, that if your starting point of faith, if you believe that God is a merciful Father, so then everything that occurs you will see in that light. If you start with the opposite axiom, that God is cruel and vindictive and heartless, then whatever you experience will confirm that. So the historical experience is valuable. It's not to be dismissed. It's not to be dismissed. It's very, very important. Avraham Avinu wanted that connection to Shem. He wanted to hear from Shem. And that's what the Pasuk says. That the Choresh encouraged the Tzarech. The carpenter, Shem, gave chizuk, he gave strength to the metal worker, which is Avraham. But it has to start with the set of philosophical axioms that Avraham brings to the table. Once we have the faith of Avraham, which is rigorously developed, now the historical experience of Shem has value. But the historical experience of Shem in and of itself has no value, the proof being that his own children were Rishayim. And it could be, this is why Shem is called the Machlik B'Patish. He's the person who does the finishing work. And Avraham Avinu is called the Hoylem Poam. He's the person who does the starting work. And that's exactly the point, because Emunah has to begin with the rigor of Avraham. Once you have the rigor of Avraham, then it can be enhanced, it can be finished, it can be perfected with the historical experience of Shem. So Shem is the Machlik B'Patish. He's the one who does that the gentle tapping, which puts the finishing touches on the work. But Avraham Avinu is the Hoylem Poam. He's the one who starts off the whole process. And therefore, this encounter is very, very, very significant in this sense. In other words, Avraham Avinu is the philosopher of faith, but what Shem provides is the confirmation that came from the historical experience of the earlier generations. So this encounter is very, very, very significant. Yeah.
You think it might be the other way around. Somebody comes and tells you about an experience and tells you in such a profound way, and then you start to think about it. It could argue the other way. Somebody has an experience like we went through Sinai. We went through the desert and da da da. If you're coming to a ger, you would tell them about the experience, and then you say, "You really think about this."
And the Rambam holds not like that. The Rambam holds by a ger himself. You start with the fundamentals of faith. The Rambam holds it has to start the other way. But this is, I think, one aspect of the meeting. But there's another medrash which talks about another aspect of the meeting, which is a fantastic thing. There's a medrash in Tehillim which says the following. It says that Avram, now the Gemara tells a similar story in a slightly different way, but the medrash tells it this way, that when Avram encountered Shem, which undoubtedly is this episode in the Parsha, he asked Shem a question: in what merit did you emerge from the table? In what merit did you come out alive? So Shem answered, in the merit of tzedakah, in the merit of charity. So Avram asked, what charity did you do in the table? There are no people in the table. There are no poor people on the table. So Shem said it was the charity we did with the animals. We sustained the animals, we fed the animals. They were very difficult. There were some animals that we fed by day, by night. It was hard work. But in the merit of that chesed, we emerged from the table. So the Medrash says that after that, this is when Avram got the idea to make his famous Eshel, his famous hostel, where he provided food, drink, and lodging. Now, we explored this question in past years. We said that, we know two different things about Avraham Avinu. We know on the one hand that Avraham, as the Rambam says, was a philosopher. He was a person that through the sheer power of intellect came to understand that there is a God and so on and so forth, and he worked to spread this message to all mankind. We also know that Avraham Avinu is the exemplar of chesed. Now, in Kabbalah, he is considered the embodiment of the midah, the divine midah of chesed. Now, these two don't usually go hand in hand. If you think of a person who's like a massive intellect, like a real brain, right? You don't think of him as the kind of person who's doing favors for people and he's, welcoming guests and rolling out the red carpet. He lives a life of the mind. He lives in the world of ideas. So, where do these two ideas come from? So we offered various conjectures in the past, but the Medrash seems to be saying that where did Avram get the idea from? He got it from Shem. And this is an amazing, amazing thing. Because if you recall all our discussions about the Mabul, it comes out like this, that the destruction of the world in the Mabul really was a consequence of not a corruption of ideas, but a corruption of midas, a corruption of character. The sin was the sin of chamas. It was the sin of violent theft. It was the sin of selfishness, self-centeredness. Because it wasn't rooted in philosophical issues. It was rooted in personality flaws. And therefore shame undoubtedly became an important part of his life. To create a environment, a community, a setting where people would come to perfection. Avraham Avinu previously, before this encounter, lived a life of philosophical speculation, where his efforts were devoted to proving God's existence as a reality which is so crystal clear that it would be indisputable. And there's a very interesting medrash. The medrash says that the name of Yerushalayim, the city of Yerushalayim, really is a composite of two names. Melchizedek called it Shalem. Melchizedek Melech Shalem. Avram called it Yireh. Right? It says when by the Akedah, Avram called the name of the place Hashem Yireh. Hashem will see. Asher Yamer Hayom, about which it is said, Bahar Hashem Yireh. On the mountain God is seen. So Avram referred to Yerushalayim as the place from which God sees and at which God is seen. Melchizedek called it Shalem. the city of perfection. So the Meshech Chochmah says, because each of the two, his life's work was different. That Shem saw his mission to prevent another Mabul. The Mabul was because of a corruption of personality, a corruption of character, selfishness, self-centeredness, right? So his mission was to create a society which was shalem, a society that was perfect, peaceful, at peace, not in a state of conflict. And not the brutal state of nature that Hobbes described, where everyone is at war with everyone else, but shalem, a state of peace. And therefore that was his work in Yerushalayim. Avraham Avinu, his work was to bring an awareness of God. And therefore to him, what was Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is the city where God sees and where God is seen. The Rebbeinu Shlomo made a compromise. He named the city Yerushalayim to incorporate both elements. But the idea is that Avram and Shem were operating in two different realms. When did Avram embrace the agenda of Shem? At this encounter. That's what it says. That when Shem told Avram about the chesed they did in the Teva, that's when Avram said, I'm going to make an Eshel. I'm going to make this hostel that provides food and drink and lodging. In other words, that's where he got the idea from. He got the idea from Shem. Undoubtedly, according to that medrash, this is another element of the V'yachazek Charash Esarev, the carpenter giving encouragement to the metal worker. In other words, this is another aspect of what Shem gave to Avraham Avinu. In other words, Avraham Avinu's life work until this point was really devoted to bringing an awareness of God to the world. Right? Shem added the dimension of chesed, the dimension of caring for people. And the truth is that, as we know in Jewish outreach, that if you want to bring people to faith, often it is more effective to do it through the extension of kindness than through the rigor of philosophical proof. And that's just the reality. And it could be that Avraham Avinu was especially successful only after he took that advice from Shem. There are certain people that will be impacted, will be inspired, will be moved by the rigor of something which is truly intellectual. But many people will be inspired and welcomed by the kindness, the warmth, the caring. Avraham Avinu incorporated both elements, but that was the contribution that Shem made to Avram, undoubtedly in this encounter. So this encounter with Malki Tzedek, really, I think, if our conjectures are correct, is not trivial. It's really, there are two very important things that Shem adds to Avraham Avinu. First is the strengthening of Avraham Avinu's own logically rigorous faith from the historical experience of the Mabul and so on and so forth. This is a perspective which Avraham had no access to, because Avraham was totally cut off from the Masorah of Shem and Noach and Shushelach and so on and so forth. So this meeting is that, and also it's a new emphasis on the avodah of chesed, which is something which would not necessarily go hand in hand with Avraham as a religious philosopher, but it was inspired, according to the Medrash, by this encounter with Shem.